Welcome to Even Tacos Fall Apart. I know that sometimes things fall apart, but I really hope that this podcast helps you understand that you don't have to put yourself back together alone. I'm MommaFoxFire, and today's episode is both enlightening and impactful. We're exploring a subject that affects countless lives and families around the world, and that's Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder, or FASD. I talk with a truly inspiring guest, Patti Kasper, and we also work through the remarkable FASCETS Neurobehavioral Model. FASD is a complex issue that often goes unnoticed or misunderstood, but it really has far-reaching implications for individuals and their loved ones. Patti brings a wealth of knowledge and personal experience to share on this topic in this episode. Together, we unravel the impact of FASD on individuals and families, discussing the power of early intervention and support, and breaking down misconceptions about invisible disabilities. But most importantly, we explore how every single one of us can contribute to making a positive change in the lives of those affected by FASD and other mental illnesses as well. So whether you're directly connected to FASD in some way, or you're just curious to learn more about this topic, you are in the right place. This episode is enlightening, and I really can't wait to have everyone dive into the conversation. Before we begin, a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, so you never miss an episode. And if you find this episode valuable in the end, please consider leaving a like or even a review. Any engagement where you're clicking buttons or typing anything can help me reach more people who could benefit from these kinds of conversations. Now let's jump into this eye-opening conversation about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and the incredible FASCETS Neurobehavioral Model with our guest, Patti Kasper. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to acknowledge that the audio quality you're about to hear was recorded prior to some equipment and microphone upgrades, which have been made possible by the incredible support from listeners like you. I truly appreciate your understanding as I work to continue enhancing your listening experience. Your support has allowed me to make significant improvements for the podcast sound quality and overall production. And I just want to encourage everyone to continue supporting the show, whether that is to like, subscribe, and review on your favorite podcast platform, or to go to the website, tacosfallapart.com, and there's a big support button that you can make some contributions in a way that works for you. All of those help me make ongoing upgrades and improvements and help me deliver the best content possible. So thank you for being part of this podcast community and for letting me make these positive changes and for really making those positive changes possible. And now we can jump into today's discussion. Hello. Welcome to another Mental Health Monday. I'm really excited about tonight's topic. We are going to be talking about FASD's the FASCETS Neurobehavioral Model and child welfare with Patricia Kasper. Very excited to have her with us today. Tell a little bit about Patricia. She is committed to improving children's lives by providing practical tools to parents and professionals who care for children with brain-based differences, whose behaviors are reflective of either brain changes that resulted from exposure to prenatal toxins and or from trauma, or reflective of the poor fit between their cognitive abilities and the world's expectations of them. She's worked in the fields of mental health and child welfare for over 30 years and has worked with hundreds of foster and adoptive families, which is really cool. She's led workshops in the areas of adoption, trauma and resiliency, attachment, and neurobehavior for several years. Her other work as a hospice chaplain has fueled her fire of helping others to live life well and end the cycle of intergenerational trauma. And I just want to pause there for a second and say, good on you for that job, because when my grandfather was in the hospital, that chaplain really made all the difference to him. It was a very, very impactful to have him, and he was in hospice care at the end. So very impactful to have him stopping by and visiting with the family and everything. So for sure, something that is very, very good and helps the families and those who need it as well. As a certified facilitator of FASCETS Neurobehavioral Model, which is Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Consultation, Education, and Training Services. Patti is also
FASCETS for short. You can see why.
FASCETS for short. Yes, you have to have an abbreviation for that one, most definitely. Patti is also committed to work with state agencies and contracting partners to become FASD informed in their practices in preparation to meet the expected regulations once FASD is nationally codified as a developmental disability.
She seeks to share her depth of knowledge and understanding gained through 3 decades of work in the mental health and child welfare fields, knowing that it is not taught in grad school, with all this caring for our most vulnerable, our children and our youth. So y'all, I have some social links for you, Facebook groups, websites, LinkedIn, all of that. I'm going to post those in the chat. And Patti, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
As we are going through our interview here, we do have a question queue set up. If you have any questions for our guests, be sure to type !Q in the chat. Follow with your question. We'll make sure that it gets asked and answered here. And we're just going to kind of dive in from there. So can you tell us just a little bit about your experiences and what made you become interested in specializing in mental health?
Sure. So I'm a professional student. I'll just start there. I started college at 16 and kept changing my major and my school and losing credits as I went along.
Yes.
Yeah, so it was well-rounded education. But the closer I got to what I felt God was calling me to do, which was mental health, the easier things got for me. And I think that's true for most of us. You know, when we have if we have a calling on our life, the closer we get to it, the more natural it becomes. Right? So, for instance, I'm not a science person so much. So nuclear medicine, as much as I loved the salary that would have offered, it was not the right fit for my life. It was not a good fit. I'm glad I didn't waste more than a year on that. So, anyway, so within the fields of mental health, I've done a number of things. I started in drug and alcohol counseling. And then I started into trauma. I was actually, when I was a clinical director of an inpatient adult psych unit, that was back when multiple personality was a thing. And so I went to a conference, ran into a colleague. We really hit it off, and I actually visited his center in Texas for a week. That's all he treats is, that's all he treats is dissociative identity disorder. So that was fascinating. So I love doing these deep dives into subjects as they will benefit the people that I'm working with and supporting. So that was one thing. When I married my husband, he's out here in California. The licensing laws are so different in California from what they were back east. And by that time, so much time had passed from when I got my graduate degree and when I would have had to jump into how do I get all this approved. I ended up sidestepping back to social work, which was my undergrad, and working in foster care and adoptions for the last 23 years. And so I was really pleased about that. I missed doing therapy. I missed it a lot. But again, when you get closer to your calling, the easier things become. And once I started doing adoption social work, I stopped missing being a therapist. And I've always been an educational geek, right? Not only for my own life, but knowledge is power, right? So I can work with a child, but if I'm not providing a lot of information to the parents, will they be able to support that good work? Probably not, right? So, for instance, when I'd write home studies for prospective adoptive families or foster families, it would take me so much longer than it would take other social workers. Why? Because I can't leave their home without providing education on issues that come up. And one of those things that kept coming up time and time again was kids falling between the cracks because they take these children to therapy, and no matter which clinic, no matter which therapist, they weren't getting any better. What do we do about that, right? So I thought at first, well, maybe it's the trauma and the way that they're responding to trauma. So I went through the training program with Texas Christian University for their TBRI, right? Trust-based relational interventions. So I am a TBRI practitioner. I can do that. I've been training that for years. But then I realized it's still not enough. They talk about brain, but it's still not enough. So I was introduced, in a circular way, to FASCETS. And that was it. My practice was revolutionized. Mm-hmm. The way that I taught parents to look at their kids' behavior and what does it mean and what can I do about it, it's night and day. It's absolutely night and day. So then I started thinking, well, I want to teach more than just, a 6-hour class every semester. I want to train more people. I want to train all the staff, not just our adoptive parents. And my company just wasn't able to maximize my training that way. Mm-hmm. So we ended up parting ways. And so now I am in business so that I can have that bigger reach than I could have working for, no matter which company, a relatively small foster family agency. So.
Yeah. I love that it was just like the journey, right? It's the path that you take to get to where you're going. You said you started college at 16. Did you graduate early? Did you? How did you manage that? Yeah,
I did. That's the yuppie version of running away from home.
Perfect.
I'm just blessed that my dad could afford to do that. So
yeah. Yep, absolutely. That's great. That's wonderful. What a good way to put that too.
Yeah.
So what's your favorite thing about working in this field, and what are some of the biggest challenges that you have?
I think my favorite thing is that you can see results, right? You can see that you're having an impact. You can see lives change. I think that's the major draw, but, of course there are setbacks because systems, no matter what system it is, systems have a lot of limitations. So there's unfortunately always going to be issues of access. And that's hard to deal with. I live and work in a county that does not support this one area that I am dedicated to, being fetal alcohol.
Yeah.
So that's frustrating, but a lot of good people, and none of us knew what we didn't know until we actually learned it.
Absolutely.
So.
Do you have an all-time favorite movie, book, podcast, game, any of the above that you feel like everybody should know about?
Oh, all-time favorite movie, I would have to say, is Steel Magnolias.
Ah, okay.
Such an incredible ensemble of talent.
Very iconic.
Yeah, and I have type 1 diabetes, so it hits close.
Have you seen the new one?
No.
The redo of it? They did a redo in just a few years ago, I think. I don't remember who. Hold on, I'll find it.
Well, while you're looking for that, which I will write down as soon as you get it, I would say, and games, who doesn't like Uno?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, but my mom and I play a game of double solitaire called Russian Bank. And we've been playing it she's been playing it with me for probably around 55 years, right? Since I was old enough to learn it. But she's been playing it for probably close to 80 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And so she has dementia at this point. So by our continuing to play that several times a week, I'm able to track her decline.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, was in 2012, which I did not think it was that old, y'all. I did not realize that it was in 2012. But it has Queen Latifah in it, is the main the main character. So if you haven't seen that one yet, it's
same name?
Same name, Steel Magnolias, but it's the 2012 one, and the other one was in 1989. So quite the gap there.
Queen Latifah.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to be looking for that.
Yep,
I'm not sure when I'm going to have time to watch it, but I will have to carve out some time.
Sometimes you just need a little break. You just need some time to sit back and watch something, and maybe this can be it for you next.
That'll work. That'll work.
So can we just, getting into the topic tonight, can we take a little step back? And what are fetal alcohol spectrum disorders? How many people are impacted by them? Just kind of the basics here.
Yeah. So it is a spectrum disorder, right? It's fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And so it's an umbrella term describing the broad range of physical, neurobiological, cognitive, behavioral, adaptive, and functional effects that can occur when someone is prenatally exposed to alcohol, right? So the effects are going to vary from person to person. No two people are impacted the same way. And there are a number of diagnoses under that umbrella. So the first one, which most people are familiar with, is fetal alcohol syndrome, right? And it includes facial feature changes, right? In order to have that diagnosis, you have to have facial changes, and there's certain changes, and you have to have abnormalities in your central nervous system, and you have to have adaptive and functioning effects, or growth retardation, so small birth weight and very slow to, always being on the smaller side, right? And then the last thing is you have to have a documented history of maternal drinking.
Yeah.
And that holds a lot of people back, right? Because a lot of, especially if someone is in the social services system, they get drug screened when they give birth to someone, and all babies get screened, right? So if there are drugs on board and the mom knows that there's the paper right there, they're going to admit to that. But guess what? Alcohol's not among those screened.
Right. Yeah.
There is testing for alcohol, but it's much more expensive, so it's typically not done.
Mm-hmm.
So why would you admit to a legal drug when you're already busted for the illegal ones?
Mm-hmm.
Right? The other piece of that is doctors are still uncomfortable asking a woman if she's been drinking during her pregnancy because there is a stigma.
Yeah, absolutely.
There is a stigma, and I know we'll get to that down the road. There's also PFAS, which is partial fetal alcohol, right? And then there's ARND, which is alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder. That probably catches more than any other category. ARBD, which is alcohol-related birth defects, and there are numerous with those. And then there's NDPAE, which is still actually not on the official side. It's in the probably going to make the next edition criteria, right? And that is neurobehavioral disorder associated with prenatal alcohol exposure. So as far as the prevalence, from 2017, the stat is 1 in 20 people have and are somewhere on that FASD spectrum, right? That's 5% of the general population. 1 in 20 is, that's a minimum of 1 kid per classroom, right? It dwarfs autism spectrum. It's 2.5 times more prevalent than autism spectrum disorder.
Wow.
But it's mostly undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. Yeah. So
what are some of the symptoms and signs to watch for at various ages to know if it's not caught at birth?
Yeah. Well, let me get to that in just a second. So I said 5%, right? That was 2017.
Yeah.
That was pre-COVID. How did people cope with the lockdowns?
Putting vodka in here instead of water.
Alcohol sales went up 20%.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the lockdowns are behind us for the time being. They may be coming back. But the alcohol sales have remained high, which means when all the babies born in the last 3 years get to school and problems become more apparent, we're really going to have an epidemic here.
Yeah.
Right? And within foster care, it's not 5%. It's 80. 8 in 10 foster kids are somewhere on that spectrum, even if they're not yet diagnosed.
That is so high.
Yeah. Which is why I want to stand on the mountaintop and scream this out as loud and as far as I can, because more people need to know.
Absolutely. I didn't know that. That's shocking, honestly.
Yeah. Their children are 17 to 19% more likely to be in the foster care system if they have FASD. And once they're in the system, their odds of having a stable placement fall dramatically, especially if it's not diagnosed.
Does that likelihood, is that driven by the typical use of alcohol during pregnancy, or kind of situational, or is it education during pregnancy that's the
It's everything.
Driver there? Everything, a little bit of all of it.
It's everything. So let me ask you, at what point do most women find out they're pregnant?
Oh,
at what point in the pregnancy?
That's highly dependent on whether or not you're trying, really.
Yeah. So here in the States, our rate of unplanned pregnancies is 45%.
Yep.
Yeah. But when do we typically realize we're expecting a child? How far along are we?
6 to 8 weeks, I would say.
Minimum.
Yeah.
So I mentioned facial feature changes, right? That's a very small sliver of people on the spectrum. And the reason for that is because the face is being formed on days 17 through 21. That's 5 days.
Yeah.
Outside of that, you're not going to see changes to the face. You're still going to see changes to the brain and to other body systems, just not the face. So that's one misbelief, is that if you have the facial changes, you're worse off than if you don't, right? It's actually the opposite, because if you have those facial changes, it's easy to start asking, what's going on? Let's make a diagnosis. Without those changes, a child's behavior does not point to something being biologically wrong.
Yeah.
And kids get blamed, shamed, and punished for behaviors that are the result of a birth defect, the result of brain damage, of a brain injury. It's not a choice.
Yeah.
Right? So they're actually, even though they don't have the facial changes, they're the ones at a significant disadvantage. They're the ones that don't get diagnosed, or get diagnosed with something else.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were starting to ask if there's different signs or symptoms for age of diagnosis. So those facial features that we talked about, so it's eyes that have small eye openings, this section of your upper lip between your nose and the edge of your upper lip, that can be flat, like that ridge is just really minimal. It could be stretched out, extra long, and a very thin upper lip. Those 3 changes there's a lot on the old charts. There's a lot of things you can see on the older charts of what does it supposed to look like. But really, most of those other signs can come from other things. These three, especially if these three are together, it's only alcohol.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but those facial changes are most apparent between the ages of 8 months and 8 years. So, I mean, we can, if we look at an array of photographs over our lifespan, we can see that it's still us, but our faces do change over time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So as far as other signs and symptoms, one of the biggest areas of impact is that our social and emotional development lags behind the rate of development of our bodies, right? So it's very common for someone with an FASD to act roughly half their age. So if you're a 2-year-old, but you're still at the milestone development of a 1-year-old, it's not that big of a deal, right? If you're 8 in 3rd grade and still acting like a 4-year-old, it's going to be problematic.
Yeah.
If you're 17 in high school, about to graduate, but you're acting like an 8 or 9-year-old, there's going to be a lot of problems, right? And if you're 40 with the judgment of a 20-year-old, there's going to be a lot of problems. So, and there's a word for that, and we call this dysmaturity, right? It's different than acting immature. If we are acting immature, then it's just a persona that we've popped on for entertainment or whatever, but we can snap out of it, right? We can just take that persona off and act our age.
That acting part is key there.
Yeah. But with dysmaturity, it's not acting. With dysmaturity, we are that aspect of our lives and of our brains is developing much more slowly. And it leaves us very vulnerable. One of the things about people with an FASD is they want so much to please. And because they are socially younger than their years, they are incredibly vulnerable. And they are oftentimes targeted by people that, want to set them up to do things. Like in school, the school bullies will set them up to do something so that the child with an FASD is the one that gets in trouble, but the whole thing is for the entertainment of the bully and his friends.
Yeah.
Right? Fast forward a few years, and it's criminals that will target this vulnerability, right? So that it's the person with FASD who ends up in prison. Right?
Are there any stats on prison populations and FASD?
There is up to a third are felt to have an FASD.
Wow.
Yeah.
These numbers are crazy. I mean, that's just absolutely staggering.
61% of kids with FASD will have issues with recurrent suspensions or expulsions or dropping out of high school. Wow. 30% of homeless have an FASD. So the outcomes can be horrible if we don't catch it early enough and set accommodations into place that avoid a lot of the secondary symptoms, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But there's a number of different categories of behaviors that we see with FASD. So FASD, again, it's an umbrella of physical issues. It's a physical condition with behavioral symptoms, right? So when we're thinking about behavior, we can't assume that someone is doing something on purpose, but we have to ask what's underneath that. What's behind that? What's driving it? So there's a researcher in the field of FASD and Guth. Yes. Third time's a charm. So she broke behaviors down into 3 categories because it used to all be one list, right? But she broke things down into being primary characteristics versus secondary symptoms and tertiary symptoms, right? So primary characteristics are those behaviors that point to the way the brain is wired, right? So they impact a number of things. We talked about one of those things being the dysmaturity, right? There's also sensory integration, right? Our senses give us information about the world around us, right? And sometimes the wiring cannot be so good there, making us overly sensitive to things, right? You've probably talked with some guests that talked about kids being very overly sensitive to noise or fluorescent light bulbs or crowds, right? So you see a lot of that here too. Or you can be undersensitive to things. For instance, you might not feel the cold. So what happens if you don't feel cold? You never remember your jacket.
Right.
Right? These are the kids that have 2 or 3 jackets at the lost and found by the end of the winter. Right? It could be about pain. Right? I have a friend of mine adopted one of her kids who twisted her ankle. And you know, when you start to feel your ankle, you'll throw yourself down to protect your ankle. Well, when she did that, she landed on her arm and she broke it right into through the skin, right? Compound fracture. And all she did was say, "Mom, I broke my arm."
Oh my gosh.
The pain did not register.
Wow.
The pain did not register. Right? Which sounds crazy, but it happens. It happens, and it's one of those sensory processing issues, right? When, Snickers capitalized on this with their hangry commercials.
Yep.
Right? There's that broken link between the stomach and the brain. Right? Well, the link could be broken in another way, too. A child might not ever get the signal that it's time to stop eating. And these are the kids that gorge until they puke. Right? So, a number of things can go wrong there. There's also, speaking of hangry, there's nutritional issues, and the ability to absorb nutrients can be different with kids with FASD. Aside from the issues of, do you know when you're hungry? Do you know when you're full? The other piece of that is whenever, let me start here, a fully functioning brain that works the way it's supposed to work sucks up 25% of our available energy, right? It's a battery drain, right? If the brain is wired in such a way that it works harder than is typical, because it's got a lot of detours that it has to make in order for signals to get along the way. If you're working harder just to do basic things, then you deplete all your energy very early in the day. So these kids will barely make it through the school day, and they're a complete terror at home because they're just done.
Yeah.
Right? There's reports of kids coming home after a stressful day and heading straight to the sugar bowl and just eating spoons of sugar.
Oh,
there's reports of kids eating
sweet.
a stick of butter because fat converts very quickly to sugar. It's that same process that we see in a pregnant woman who gets cravings for very specific nutrients that her baby needs. Somehow her brain says, "Oh, My son needs this. Oh, it's in that food. Honey, go get me. It's that same miracle, right? Our brains need sugar as fuel. And if we don't get enough sugar, bad things happen. I know this as a type 1 diabetic.
Right? Yeah, that's a great illustration right there.
Yeah, bad things. And we were talking about steel magnolias, right? That scene in the beauty shop.
Yep.
And I don't know if you caught it, but that scene when she's at the hospital getting ready to leave work on Halloween, and she's standing in the doorway talking to her friend, and they're talking about what they're going to do, and she does this little bob and weave at the door jamb. What that is her body sent her the signal, you need food, and she ignored it.
Interesting.
Because I do it all the time.
Yeah.
Every diabetic does it.
Huh.
No one but a diabetic would recognize that watching that movie.
Yeah, I didn't notice that at all.
Yeah. But that's why she ended up going in a coma, because she didn't treat it.
So we have a couple people in chat that I just want to say. Pablo asks, is there a chance to talk with you right now? Pablo, we are here talking with Patricia Kasper about FASDs and the FASCETS Neurobehavioral Model. If you have questions about that, feel free to pop them into the chat. We are happy to work them in. And then Bite Mark is here, and she did ask, what is your favorite poem? So we'll go ahead and address that one. And
it is Psalm 23rd. It's the 23rd Psalm. Right. All of the Psalms are technically poems, but
that's true.
But that's my fave.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the one, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. That one. Yes. Yep. It's a good one. It's a very popular one. Absolutely.
Yeah. So here's the thing. He leads me beside still waters. How do you interpret that?
I mean, like calm seas is kind of how I've always thought of it.
Okay. Or it could be beside the still waters, because still waters can be stagnant. You don't want to go through them.
Yep,
you need to go beside them.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That's a good interpretation too. She says another unique answer, so many different answers to this one. We always get different answers to that question. It's such a good one.
Yeah.
It's always different.
So, anyway, other primary characteristics or behaviors that point to having a uniquely wired brain include abstract thinking, right? So what are some things that are abstract? Well, basically, the opposite of abstract is concrete, right? If you can't rest it in your hand to manipulate it, to figure out what it is and how it works, this is concrete. If you can't do this, it's abstract, right? It's why these folks with FASD have trouble with money and money management, right? Well, how do you explain the concept of a bank? If you don't see the money there,
yep,
right? Credit
You're not
card
holding your gold bars. Yeah.
Exactly. Time is abstract. And one of the little bugaboos about time with people with FASD is they often lose the ability to track the passage of time, which is why these kids are always completely surprised when that 10 minutes has run out. Right? Because time stands still in their world. Right? There's nothing but what they're doing. So these are people who are typically late for everything. Right? Which is a joke in my family, and I laugh at myself. I will find a way of being late for my own funeral. I officiated a funeral a few months ago for one of my hospice patients, and I was late.
Oh,
no. Nobody told me there were 3 entrances to the cemetery. And I was at the one at the opposite end of the cemetery from where they were doing it. Well, leave it to me. No one else would get there 30 minutes early and still be late. So time is another one. Personal property or ownership, that's an abstract concept. So oftentimes, people with FASD are accused of stealing. Is it stealing? No one's name is on it. So how do they know? What makes it belong to someone else, right? Language is abstract, right? Where I grew up, there was a phrase about redding up someone's room, right? What would you say that means?
Say it again.
Redding up your room.
Redding up your room?
Mm-hmm.
Like readying up your room? Like cleaning it up?
Mm-hmm. That's it.
Yeah.
You're making it ready for company, right? Yeah. But most people say redding instead of readying.
Yeah, right. It did right? Throw me. I'm like, how do you red a room?
So a child who's a concrete thinker is going to go to the garage and look for the red paint.
Yeah. They're not going to make that little leap.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, so those are some examples of abstract. There's also memory and learning and memory, right? So most of the time, the way teaching happens in this country is language-based, right? Most of it is verbal, but by and large, it's either auditory or visual, right? So these kids we all have different learning preferences, right? All of us do. And those preferences can be, we can all take information in through several different means, but we'll choose one that works better for this versus this other style that works better for that, right? For instance, you would want kinesthetic or hands-on, right? Learn by doing for home ec class or shop or the driving part of driver's ed, right? When it comes to compute, and we also have preferences for how to teach others, right? So my classic example where things can be a mismatch is if I am stuck on the computer and I ask my husband, long story short, I've learned to ask anyone but him. Now, it's not that he doesn't know, because he knows more than I ever will. He's genius at it. But he teaches by being at the keyboard, right? He doesn't talk people through it. He shows, and you better be able to watch and learn. That's not the way I learn. I learn by sitting at the keyboard and doing, right? So it's a mismatch. Doesn't work. So we have to know this about our children. What's their learning style, right? And we have to accommodate that if we want things to come more easily for them, right? Memory is another tricky thing. So FASD interferes with memory. It can make it difficult to put information into memory. It can also make it difficult for retrieval, right? Add to that, a lot of the times, you're not only exposed to alcohol, but you're also exposed to trauma, right? Let me ask you, do kids who have been through trauma sleep very well?
Probably not.
Probably not, because they've learned to sleep with an eye open, right? Looking for danger, listening for danger, so they never fall into that deep sleep. But that deep sleep is when memory gets transferred from short-term to long-term, right? Then if you stress someone out by asking them a question, they're really not going to be able to get that information back out of the memory banks. So there's all of those issues. There's also processing speed, which affects not only the speed of our thinking, but it can affect the speed of our listening, right? A child or an adult who has slow auditory processing speed basically only hears every one word out of 3. So can you imagine how frustrating that would be if you're having a conversation with someone and you're only hearing 1 out of every 3 or 4 words that they're telling you, and they expect you to be able to participate in the conversation as if you have no problems because you look normal, right? They don't expect you to have the struggles that you do. So obviously we want to slow down and give them more time, right? It's kind of like our regional differences in this country, right? If you're in the deep South, there's a very slow cadence, right? Everything's chill and relaxed. But if you were anywhere from New York or further northeast, you're in hyperspeed, right? And those, if you're from those, if you have 2 people from those very different regions, they have trouble, right? The Northerners, the Yankees, look at the Southerners and go, oh, come on, spit it out already, I'm bored, right? And the Southerners are like, can you just take a breath?
Yeah.
Right? So we have this same issue with our kids with fetal alcohol. Not all of them, because again, there's no 2 people are impacted the same way. There's also executive functioning. So that's this forward part of the brain that directs decision-making, judgment, being able to figure out what comes next, right? Predicting outcomes, comparing things, right? And a lot of other things are kind of mixed in with that, right? So comparing things, you're talking about mental constructs. So it's abstract, right? You can have physical things on the desk, but if you're comparing them in your mind, it's a construct already. So you have that added layer. So all of those things, plus our unique strengths and learning preferences, those are all primary characteristics because all of those are as unique to us as our fingerprint, right? That's the essence of neurodiversity, right? Other behaviors are what we call secondary symptoms, and they don't reflect the rewiring of the brain. What they reflect is the poor fit between my abilities and what people expect of me, right? Because people in our country, pretty much everywhere, we expect people to act a certain way according to their age, right? That's how we group people, whether it's school or whether it's scouts or what, no matter what activity, we group people by age. So what we need to do instead is group people by their social development instead, because it's more of a peer situation. Yeah. So we get a lot of very common defense behaviors, right? Let me ask you, have you ever felt judged? Or for those people in the audience, for everyone in the audience, I ask you, can you think of a time where you have been judged? And what feelings, as you think of that scenario, what feelings come up for you?
I mean, it definitely depends, but as a fat woman, I feel judged all the time. It depends on the situation, but it could be anger, it could be sadness, it could be frustration, annoyance, shame, like any of those could depend.
And when those feelings, and when those feelings come up, what do you want to do?
Again, really depends, but most of the time, like, go isolate, honestly.
Yeah. So think of someone with an FASD, which is a physical disability, right? The brain is a physical organ that dictates the functioning of every other body system we have. So it's very much a physical disability, but it's invisible. So no one understands the things that we struggle with, right? So all those feelings that you just mentioned, from pain to shame to anger, right? To the desire to flee or to get in an argument or even fisticuffs, right? All
Sometimes
of those.
it is that.
I knew that about you.
Yep. You know what? Especially when flying. That's when it's like that fight part comes out.
Right?
When I'm on a flight is when the fight comes out.
Yeah. Something about the airlines brings out the worst in all of us,
it
right?
really does.
So I have to admit, I'm one of those obnoxious people. On my last flight was from Pittsburgh back to LAX. They have one of my all-time favorite Pittsburgh restaurants, the airport. So even though it was early morning when I got there, I bought me a sandwich, as only this place can fix it. And while everyone else was eating their little package of peanuts, I was eating a really, really bomb sandwich.
Nice. Now you have to share which restaurant and what sandwich.
Oh, I'm going to have to circle back to that because I can't think of it.
Oh,
it makes those travel shows where they do famous restaurants in a city, right? This has been featured on that.
Okay.
And doggone, hopefully it'll come to me. Hopefully. But it was corned beef.
Oh, I love corned beef.
Corned beef. But so with this place, they put the fries inside the sandwich instead of on the side. Everything is on the inside, which sounds really gross.
Yeah.
Try it.
I mean, I would try it, but like, I like my fries on the side and crispy.
Yeah, you just got to try it.
So a lot of these things that you're talking about are very common to other things as well. So how do you distinguish an FASD from something like ADHD or autism or even ODD? Right.
So, and you named several of the things that FASD is misdiagnosed with.
Yeah.
Right?
I can immediately see that. Like, it would be.
Yeah. So these secondary symptoms, it's important to realize that those are the symptoms that get kids referred to counseling. Right? But it's also important to realize that they're not necessarily pathology. They're normal defensive reactions to being judged, blamed, shamed, punished for something that is unfair. Right? So, and then there's also tertiary symptoms, right? And that's what happens when you have a chronic poor fit, right? That's when systems get involved. You know, adopted kids will end up back in social services, right? So the importance of early diagnosis is that the earlier you can identify an FASD or other neurobehavioral condition, right? The impact of drugs, the impact of trauma, the impact of, the cord being wrapped around the neck during delivery, the lack of oxygen, or chronic maternal stress during the pregnancy. That does a number on the baby too. The importance of finding out what is behind the behavior, it's critical. And the reason is because if you identify it, then you can accommodate it and you can avoid those secondary characteristics. You can prevent a lot of them. If they've already come up, you can reduce the severity or the frequency, right? And you can totally avoid the tertiary ones if you diagnose early, right? If you want, I know you usually ask about crime at the beginning of your episodes, so think about Nicholas Cruz, right? That is the epitome of everything that can go wrong by not diagnosing early enough and not putting supports into place early enough. That's a whole lot of rage that's pent up that could have been avoided. right? By people paying attention early on and knowing to look outside the box, right? Because you nailed it. So much of this does overlap. There's a lot of similarities between FASD and all the common behavioral diagnoses that are made for our kids these days, right? So I printed out the diagnostic criteria for a lot of these other issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned ODD, right? Oppositional defiant behavior or disorder. So that is a pattern of angry mood, argumentative or defiant behavior, right? A pattern of behavior. That right there tells you secondary symptom of FASD. It's an older child that gets that diagnosis, right? So the specific behaviors for that are often loses temper, often touchy or easily annoyed, often argues with adults or authority figures, often refuses to comply with requests or rules, or blames others for his or her mistakes, right? You see all of that with FASD.
Mm-hmm.
Not in every child, because everyone's a little bit different, but all of that 100% overlap with FASD. Autism spectrum disorder, you brought that up. So there's two categories. There's A, persistent deficits in social communication. Difficulty with social emotional reciprocity, right? The back and forth communication with social rules. Failure to initiate or respond to social communications, right? And then B, the other half of autism, is restricted, repetitive patterns of behaviors or interest, right? So insistence on sameness, right? Difficulty with transitions from one activity to another, rigid thinking, hyper or hypo sensitivity to sensory input, right? Example, apparent indifference to pain or temperature. What did I say earlier?
Yeah.
100% overlap, right? ADD often has difficulty sustaining attention during lectures, conversations, doesn't seem to listen when spoken to directly, often does not follow through on instructions, often has difficulty organizing tasks or activities, often easily distracted by extraneous stimuli, often talks excessively, often interrupts or intrudes on others. Again, 100%. Also FASD. Have you heard the phrase that if you hear hoofbeats, you're automatically going to expect horses? FASD is the zebra in the room. We've got to start thinking about zebras.
Yeah.
The way we think about mental health in our society is in silos, right? Little diagnostic silos, one for each diagnosis, right? The way we come up with diagnoses are behavioral symptoms, right? The more diagnoses you get, the more confusing it is, right? So a diagnosis simply is a shortcut. It's a short buzz phrase for a whole lot of meaning, right? It describes the behaviors. It describes the causes. It describes the way people should be able to function, right? But the more diagnoses we add and where things overlap, then we have to tease out, but what about this? And what about that? And what about the other? And you end up with families who are confused and angry and desperate and thinking, if only I could get the right diagnosis, if only I could get the right medication, if only I could get the right therapist, right? Then my child will be well. What does that mean? What are you really hoping for? Are you hoping for an absence of struggle? Well, that's not realistic if someone has an FASD, because it's a biological change. It's a physical change in the brain that you don't outgrow, right? But it's also not realistic really in today's world for anybody anyway, right? No suffering, no trials. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
If instead we think of the brain as being the organizing concept, right? Then we can think in terms of brain tasks and brain function. What's easy? What's hard? How can we adjust? How can we accommodate? And it actually makes things much easier. If you have or work with a child with multiple diagnoses, or an adult with multiple psychiatric diagnoses, mental health diagnoses, chances are you're working with someone or parenting someone with a neurobehavioral condition that just hasn't been diagnosed yet. Mm-hmm. Because no one's looking for the zebra.
Yeah.
So 61, let's see, I talked about already the suspensions, expulsions, and dropouts, right? 61%. 30 times more likely to have criminal justice involvement, right? Between that strong need for connection, and that need is often met by people who want to take advantage, right? Coupled with poor judgment and not being able to learn from past mistakes. 17 to 19% more likely to be in foster care. We talked about that. So there's other mental health stats that I thought you would find interesting. 5.7 times more likely to have a mood disorder. 8.9 times more likely to have depression.
Wow.
4.6 times more likely to have an anxiety disorder, right? And those really they're not surprising, right? If you have lived, however short or long your lifespan is, if you've lived that length of time without anyone understanding you or being able to support you appropriately, well, yeah, it'd be completely normal and natural to be depressed or anxious. Right? One of the hallmark symptoms is inconsistent behavior, right? Someday you can know something and, like I can know everything that Miss Smith taught me in school today. I got it down pat, and tomorrow it'll be like I never heard it. That leaves a lot of people confused. Or, I can tie my shoes one day, and the next day, those strings won't cooperate. It's impossible. And the kid gets yelled at for being lazy or unmotivated, right? Or just wanting to be babied, right? 17.1 times more likely to have a panic disorder.
Wow.
18.1 times more likely to have ADD or ADHD. And you can have both. Even though the symptoms all overlap, you truly can have both. But there's a huge difference, right? The symptoms are the same. Your understanding of what they mean is different, right? What do we do with ADHD? How do we treat that?
Well, I mean, I don't know if they still do, but medicate is what they used to do.
With stimulants.
Yeah.
With stimulants, right? So if it's truly ADHD or ADD, the stimulant will work. But if those behaviors are not ADD, if they are instead fetal alcohol, is the stimulant going to help focus? No. Is the stimulant going to be able to help filter out extraneous stimuli? No. The meds won't work. Right? So it's far better if, once you have an understanding that I'm dealing with a brain disorder, right? With a a physical disorder, not something that can be medicated, but learning how to put accommodations into place, give it 3 months. And if you still see all that, then go to the meds, right? But give accommodations a chance. 6.1 times more likely to have bipolar, 4.6 times more likely to have schizophrenia, 18.4 times more likely to have agoraphobia.
Oh, wow.
Well, there's a miserable life.
Yeah.
Afraid to go out and do anything or see anyone, right? 3.7 times more likely to have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. 10.5 times more likely to have psychoses. 49.5 times more likely to have a history of suicide attempts.
Wow.
And that's from a chronic lack of understanding that it's a physical disability with behavioral symptoms, right? Here's the kicker, though. Early onset dementia, 209 times more likely.
Whoa.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
There are actually 428 comorbid conditions that run along with FASD that affect every body system. For instance, have you seen the kids that have a mouthful of silver? Let's be honest. Did you have a negative thought about the parent for poor diet and not brushing their teeth?
Personally, I did not because
Okay,
because
most people do.
Well, because my stepkids had to have things done to their teeth very early, and I know that they took care of their teeth. So, from personal experience, I know that it's not always about your dental hygiene.
But that's the judgment that most people jump to.
Yeah.
Right? And what it's actually caused by is the lack of enamel formation on the teeth, which is from FASD. Right? If you don't have enough enamel, then the sugar in whatever food, however healthy the food is, it still has sugar. If it's not water, it has sugar. Plain and simple.
A carrot. And a carrot has sugar. Like,
carrots are high sugar.
Yes, right.
They're high sugar. Trust me, I know this. From living with a body that can't process sugar on its own, right? So, without enough enamel on the teeth, the sugar that's in everything but water is going to go straight to rotting those teeth out, right? There can also be too many teeth, or too few teeth, or teeth could be fused, or teeth could be turned and implanted sideways. There's all kind of things. A much higher rate of people needing orthodontia, right? The other thing about the lack of enamel is it makes teeth very sensitive. You know how one of your signs that you have a cavity and you need to go see the dentist is either hot things, cold things, sweet things, or salty things make your teeth hurt? Yeah, so there was a mom whose kid was a really good eater as long as she was on the bottle, right? The breast or the bottle. As soon as she started to go to baby foods, though, this angelic eater became a holy terror. Right? Why? The mom decided to really be observant about this. And she noticed over time that it was her daughter could eat all the bland things, but anything that had a hint of decent flavor to it, the kid just came unglued, right? So she took her daughter to the dentist, even though it was way early and, years wise. And there's there's no enamel on here. So all the teeth got capped, problem solved, and she became an angelic eater again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing the things that you just wouldn't connect with with an FASD. So,
yeah, like early onset dementia.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
So pivoting a little bit to talk about FASCETS, you're FASCETS certified.
Yes.
Can you just tell us what that is, kind of how it differs from traditional therapy?
Absolutely. So you rattled off the name, right? Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Consultation Education Training Services. Wonderful organization. I would recommend anyone interested get the book Trying Differently Rather Than Harder by Diane Malbim. She is the one who created FASCETS, right? And started the organization, started the training format. But the neurobehavioral model looks at the brain as the source of all things, right? The source of all behavior. Standard practice or traditional therapy, right? And that comes in many forms. It comes in, like talk therapy or play therapy or ABA, right? The applied behavioral analysis that we do with autistic kids. All of those fall under standard practice, which we've all been trained in, right? It targets behavior for change, right? The neurobehavioral approach instead recognizes brain function as being the cause of all behavior, the source of all behavior, right? So it doesn't do any good to target behavior without looking at what caused the behavior, right? Because you can get rid of the behavior for a time, but unless you've addressed the source of it, it's just going to pop up again. And you're just going to create other problems in addition to, right? So learning theory is what's behind all these standard practices, right? It's what we've all been taught. We learn it within our family system. We learn it in school. The professionals to whom we take our kids have been taught it in college, right? That's all there is here for the most part. So these techniques, they're your behavior modification, right? Your cognitive therapy, your talk therapy, your out and out, behavior charts, your sticker charts, your token economies, all of that, right? They're based on learning theory, which views behavior through a lens that assigns intentionality, right? Or pathology to a behavior, right? They're values-laden interpretations of the meaning of behavior, right? And so behavior is viewed as the problem. Anytime that word should comes in, you're dealing with a value, right? Shoulds or coulds with shame smeared on them. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've heard that one before.
I haven't. That's a good one, though.
Yeah. Shoulds are coulds with shame smeared on top. So our beliefs dictate our interventions, right? Does that make sense? When behaviors are viewed as the problem, then the interventions attempt to change the behavior, right? So this inevitably and inadvertently makes things more complicated and makes things worse, right? And so we end up with, if we target for change something that is the result of a physical disability, is it going to work? Is it going to make things better? Or is it going to hurt things?
I was just going to say, I still go through something very similar with my 9-year-old. He has Tourette's syndrome, and his father cannot accept that he does not have control over his physical tics and even his verbal tics. And so I'm very much on the side that the behavior sometimes is a symptom. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes he's just acting a little crazy. Fortunately, I can tell when it's a tic and when it's not.
Yeah.
But his father cannot and refuses to even try. So I definitely get where that's coming from.
Yeah. Would we tell a child in a wheelchair, if you just tried, you could do it. You could get up and walk, right? Or you can use your wheelchair here at the house, but you better be prepared to walk when you go out that front door, right? Or telling someone who's blind, you could read that if you tried harder. If you have a neurobehavioral condition, it's not an issue of can't or won't, it's can't, right? Not without accommodations or supports, right? So the limits, theory-wise, the theoretical limits of standard practice, they contribute to those multiple diagnoses that I talked earlier about, all the different silos, right? We have that because we use the standard approach instead of looking at all of the brain as being the container, right? And our frame of reference. But we end up with multiple diagnoses and a whole bunch of different medications and increasingly constrictive environments, right? And interventions become more and more expensive, right? And they don't work any better, right? And you end up with a revolving door. Kids are in and out of the system, or they go from one clinic to the next, to the next, to the next, right? And they're frustrated and depressed, and their families are, and everybody loses. Everybody loses. So if you think about any other physical condition, we have to know the source before we can figure out what to do about it, right? That thing on your skin, do you just need a Band-Aid, or is it a melanoma? You would do something very different for a melanoma, right? Or what's another example? Is my teen ignoring me, or do they have a slow auditory processing? The behavior looks the same, but the meaning is very different, and what you would do about it is very different, right? So, same behaviors, different meanings. And if you have different meanings, then you have a different plan of attack, so to speak, right? And I know you asked me earlier if the neurobehavioral model works even if the diagnosis is not FASD. And yeah, it works for any neurobehavioral condition. So it could be the prenatal drug exposure. And, many kids are exposed to all kinds of things in utero, right? In fact, there are 50,000 things that affect the developing baby.
That's so
affects
many
their brain and their
things.
body. Uh-huh. Yeah, over 50,000. And so it does, and I use the neurobehavioral model with my mother, with her dementia, to help her understand why some things she could do yesterday she can't do today. Or some things she couldn't do yesterday she can do today.
Yeah.
Right? So it doesn't matter what causes the damage to the structure of the brain. It's switching the paradigm to think in terms of brain tasks. What's easy? What's hard? For the things that are hard, what can we put into place?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So when you get through kind of the FASCETS model, which is a therapeutic application, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which you can use therapeutic applications in non-therapy as well. But are there any specific parenting approaches that are recommended for children who have an FASD?
Yes, there are. So first of all, always ask, what if my child's brain has something to do with what I'm seeing? Right? Because truly it's not, kids will do well if they can, right? It's much better to get praise than punishment.
Yeah,
right?
No kid wants to be punished.
Exactly. Kids will do well when they can, right? So if they're not, then be curious, right? Be insatiably curious about what's going on from your child's perspective, right? Learn about these primary characteristics and what your child might be struggling with, right? What's easy for your child? What's hard for your child? Take the time to go through the neurobehavioral model to get the blueprint for your child, because every child has a different map, right?
I like that, because we encourage kids to be curious, but at some point we stop encouraging adults to be curious. So putting the context of parenting, yeah, right? I mean, putting the context of parenting as being curious about what's driving your child's behavior, I think is a good, just in general, advice for parents, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And TBRI, they do talk a lot about trauma. They do talk a lot about how the brain is involved in trauma, right? But they take it to the limit of the excitatory hormones and the calming hormones and that hormonal balance that happens with regulation. That doesn't go far enough. That doesn't look at brain tasks. What is the child capable of? And what will they never be able to do without support? Right? You can have the best therapeutic approach in the world. If it doesn't help a child do the things that they are wired not to be able to do, it's not going to be enough.
Yeah.
Right?
It's not one size fits all the time.
It's not. And that's the beauty of the neurobehavioral model, right? It is tailored to each child, right? Even twins in the womb will have different effects of the alcohol.
So, does the stigma of being at fault come into play for parents whenever they are seeking services or getting care for their children who have FASD? And how do you address that with your clients to kind of put them at ease?
Oh, well, I reassure them that paradigms, right, the way society views things, can and do change. Because 40 years ago, autism was blamed on moms for being emotionally unavailable. Well, we know that's not true. But that's what everyone thought back then, right? Yeah. So with FASD, we're still in the back then. So there's a lot that goes into it. One is that alcohol is so prevalent in our society. It's used in funerals. It's used in weddings. It's used in graduations. It's used in every holiday. It's everywhere. You cannot watch TV for an hour without seeing a couple alcohol commercials.
Yep.
Right?
There's so many of them right now.
And who are they targeting? Who do you see in those? You see couples, right? On the dance floor. It seems to be very popular lately. You see attractive people, you see celebration, you see, in movies, you see the drinking for psychological comfort, right? Emotional crutch kind of consuming it. But the commercials are always festive. They always make it attractive.
Very much so, yes.
And they have normalized it.
Yep.
They have normalized it. In the U.S., 86% of adults drink.
I'm surprised that's not higher, honestly.
Yeah. If you choose a life of abstinence, chances are you will feel pressured to defend your choice.
Yeah.
Right? So think back to when I asked you earlier, where in the pregnancy do most women discover that they're pregnant? Usually some point in the middle to the late of the second month into the third month. Yeah. For most women, right? But we already saw the facial features happen in week 3, right? Can we blame a woman for doing something before she knew she was pregnant? Absolutely not. Not at all. Most women will put down whatever it is for the sake of their baby once they find out they're pregnant.
Yep.
There are those that don't. If a woman is dependent upon alcohol, then her primary battle is with that dependency, right? And she has to, that's just, we can't blame her for that either, because she's caught in that. If it were easy to stop, once that dependency is there, if it were easy to stop, then nobody would be dependent on it, right? Is their family supporting them? Or is dad still drinking? That would make it difficult for a woman to quit drinking, right? And there's just so many factors that we can't blame it on the mom. Yeah. And it's not the mom's behavior, it's the alcohol itself, right? Which is a legal drug.
Yep.
It does more damage, though, than cocaine or heroin, because the molecule is that much smaller that it goes much further, right? And it turns the brain into Swiss cheese, in essence. Yeah. The effects vary depending on when during the pregnancy the alcohol exposure is, right? How much? Was it just a half a glass of wine, or was it a 6-pack, right? That intensity of the dose makes a huge difference. The frequency, the combination of factors, like, was it alcohol? Excuse me, I have the hiccups. Alcohol and cigarettes? Was it alcohol and marijuana? Was it, and who doesn't use these, cocaine or crank and doesn't use alcohol to come back down? If you ramp yourself up with drugs, everyone knows eventually they need sleep and they will drink to come down so that they can get that rest. Yeah. Right? They don't usually report the drinking. Sure. Right? And there's also documented cases where, for example, a woman on her day of delivery was just beside herself with worry and grief because she drank through her pregnancy. And she told the nurse, and the nurse had a very reassuring conversation. Well, a lot of people do, and chances are, right? But the nurse documented it in the chart. And when the OB-GYN saw that in the chart, he reamed out the nurse. How dare you put that in her file? She's a good woman. So there we have a child and a parent who will never know that damage was done. So early intervention is not going to happen. Services being put into place early is not going to happen. But you also have a nurse who's not going to report something very important. Because she's not going to want to get yelled at again by the doctor. And it all has to do with that stigma. Yeah. Right?
So have you...
But I was just going to say, it's a spectrum. It's a range. Right? You can have 3 master's degrees and be highly functioning and have an FASD. Right? Or you can be debilitated and never capable of independent living. And everywhere in between.
Have you witnessed where, like the woman you were just talking about, there could have been an early intervention, but she definitely fell through the cracks, but then who were able to lean on services to get support later on down the road? Have there been any success stories like that?
I can tell you that anyone who has taken the FASCETS training has credited it with saving their family.
Wow.
Right? To use the neurobehavioral model, you do not have to have a diagnosis because it is not a diagnostic tool, right? It's just a way of exploring the unique ways that your child functions. You don't need a diagnosis to have that conversation, right? Yeah. And to switch to that parenting style, right? That model. But it truly, you can use this approach with any child, whether they have a neurobehavioral condition or not. Right?
That's great.
So,
I mean, it's a good resource. So I did go ahead and put and I put the book that you recommended earlier also. I put that into the chat, and I put the FASCETS.org. So if you're interested in learning more about that, anybody can just click on it.
Right. So as a certified facilitator, I can and do provide classic neurobehavioral model training, right? I train individuals, I train foster family agencies, I train anyone who will listen and pay me. But my coaching program is more than just FASCETS. So when I coach my parents, I also bring in all these other things that I learned were so key in all my work in foster care and adoption, right? So we fold in attachment style, right? Attachment patterns, going back generations, right? And then how do you change things so that you are more a more stable pillar, an attachment point for your child? Looking at parenting styles, right? Authoritative versus authoritarian versus neglectful versus abusive, right? And anywhere, any of those 4 quadrants, looking at that. That's one of the gems from TBRI, by the way. So I will credit them with that. It's genius how they have you look at that. And then I also fold in all the bit about trauma and intergenerational trauma. So, when I coach parents, I do a lot of the classic training, but I do so much more than that. So I swear by FASCETS. They're great people that run that organization. I've never been more proud to have been certified by an organization than by FASCETS. And they do their training online also, which is very convenient. But you get all that information fairly flooded in a fairly short time period. And you have it. You have the tools, you have the information, you have the tools, and then you get to go and do. But when you wrap that in coaching and you have someone holding your hand as you go through it, right? Being there week after week, supporting you, not just in the teaching, but in the applying everything to real-time parenting, makes it stick a lot better.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Working with these kids who have a really high tendency to fall through the cracks so that seems really hard, like much harder to me than the job of a therapist, which is already hard enough. How do you stay inspired and motivated?
Did I mention I quit? That wasn't helpful, was it? It's the fire that I have in my belly for reaching more families. Basically, one of the things that I will drive home, right? Although people think of this as a childhood disability, a childhood issue, it's a developmental disorder, right? It does not go away when the child turns 18 or 21 or 26 when you lose health care, right? It doesn't go away. When cells have been damaged or killed by a substance, whether it's drugs or alcohol or trauma, whatever, it's done. It's done. That doesn't get undone. Now, the brain is what we call plastic. It is changeable. It is adaptable, right? Otherwise, we'd never learn anything. But it's kind of what we're dealing with FASD or any other neurobehavioral condition is like the hard wiring. If you have a computer, there's the firmware and there's the software, right? So you can put software in place to help if there's an issue with the firmware, but that firmware is what it is. And that's with FASD, you have compromises to the way your brain is wired. It is what it is.
Yeah.
So the fire in my belly for putting this message out there to the world is what keeps me motivated. Right? I don't people have never said I don't dream big. I only want to be a catalyst to get the world to change the way it looks at behavior.
That's
Just
it.
a minor,
That's all,
just a minor thing.
Yeah.
Just a minor thing, right? So part of my business is coaching, but part of my business also is training professionals, right? It's not enough for me to have my handful of pebbles to throw in the pond. I want to make sure that every mental health professional has a handful of pebbles to throw in the pond so that eventually, we're not a bunch of flat earthers.
Yeah. Yep. It's a good goal.
Yeah.
So going back kind of to the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned that you started college at 16. If you hadn't gone on the path that you went on now, if you had done something different, what would you be doing instead?
Well, the downside when you start college at 16, you tend to have typical teenage ambitions, right? I wanted to design my own clothes, make them in my own factories, and sell them in my own chain. And I still love clothes. And my last name is Kasper, which is a designer. Hello. Although I'm not married to that Kasper. But that would not have suited me because what's one thing we know about the fashion industry? It's cutthroat.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not that way. I would not have succeeded. Then I was assaulted and discovered the meaning of suffering. And so I went to nursing school. And I was hospitalized for a month. And I went in my bathrobe and slippers to the nursing school to ask for an application.
Oh my gosh.
I went to a different program because where I was at was run by nuns and there was a curfew. And I was like, curfew, schmurfew. I'm not doing that.
Right.
So nursing, nursing didn't work out either. Although you can probably tell I still geek out on medical stuff, right? Did you have that suspicion when I ran through all those stats?
It does come through, that research side.
Yep. So, but because of my diabetes, I have a chronic pain condition and I can't be on my feet all the time, right? So nursing is not a good fit. So then I thought, what can I do that's still helping people and still makes lots of money? Let me try nuclear medicine tech. Plus, it's only 2 years of school. Pops will be really happy. Yeah, I don't like physics. It doesn't like me. But while I was at the community college, I thought, well, let me try social work. And, it just kind of stuck.
Just stuck.
So, yeah.
That's really cool.
And, yeah. So, and then I jumped over to psychology. And because the NASW, or National Association for Social Workers, back then in the 80s, they seemed to be very elitist. Mm-hmm. Nobody's as good as we are. Well, this chick has always fought for the underdog. So I went over to psychology in a blaze of rebellion. Could that be a do-over? Well, possibly, because an MSW opens a lot more doors than any other degree. Mm-hmm. Open doors are a good thing. On the other hand, I have a vast wealth of experience that I would not have gotten if I had stayed in any of those previous majors. Right?
Yeah.
More recently, though, when I think about, well, what'll I do? How do I, now that I'm not doing foster care anymore, and I really thought about dementia as a possibility because I'm also very passionate about that, thanks to my mom. She has Lewy body, which is the kind of dementia Robin Williams had. The cruel thing about Lewy is that you know that your faculties are working some days and not others. And so you're very much aware of your demise.
Yeah.
It's very cruel. It's why he killed himself, because he wasn't yet diagnosed. He didn't understand what was happening to him.
Yeah.
So I thought about that. And if I couldn't work with FASD or other neurobehavioral conditions, then yeah, I think dementia would be another one. But to be honest, by the time my mom passes, I'll need a break.
Yeah. Yeah. That is, I mean, caregiving takes a toll on you. Whether that's parenting or taking care of your own parent or, anything like that. It really does. It takes a toll.
1/3 of us die before the person we're caring for.
Wow.
Because of the stress. Because of the chronic stress.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now I need to talk to my dad about what he's doing. About what he's doing with my grandma. Make sure he's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Do that.
Yeah.
Do that. And for anyone in the audience, if you have a loved one in your family with dementia, if you're not the one helping with the day-to-day care, step up, pitch in, and do.
Yep, we do. I do a lot of, I moved down here to be closer to my parents and my grandmother. And I do a lot of like, all right, I'm going to let Dad know I'm going over there today. And a couple times a week, I'll go over there and visit and kind of give him an update just so that A, he knows how she's doing today. Yeah. And then B, he knows that he's not the only one doing things. Although she will not go to the doctor with anyone else. Like, it's just my dad. I don't know if she doesn't trust me or what it is, but she's like, I'm not going. Yeah. I'm not going if it's not my dad. So, which is okay. So he still handles all of her appointments and stuff, but just checking on her on a daily basis is. You're right. If you know somebody who is a caregiver, offer to give them a day where you're just like, you know what, I'm going to go check on whoever it is. I'm going to go check on mom today. I'm going to go check on grandma today. Whoever.
A chance for them to get out of the house and go for a walk is golden, right? Yeah. Or to go to the spa, get a haircut, get your nails done. It means more than anything.
The high mental load. So I have a wonderful magic wand here. I thought it wasn't lighting up. I was about to be so upset. So this is my magic wand. And if you could wave this wand and eliminate one common opinion or misconception or theory surrounding mental illness, disabilities, or talking about mental health, what would it be? And I'll just give it a wave since I have the wand, but now the power is yours.
Oh, goodness. That is a really tough question. And I used to ask the kids of prospective adoptive parents, too, if I had a magic wand, what would you change about your family? And I'd always be so happy when they say nothing. That's awesome. And it's a valid answer. But what would be something that I wish would go away? I think it would be the ever-present assumption that behaviors are intentional choices.
That's a really good one and a really big one.
Yeah.
And I 100% agree.
Yeah. So as parents, you've got to stop and think, what if my child's brain has something to do with what I'm seeing? You've got to go through the neurobehavioral model. If it's with me, if it's with FASCETS, I don't care. Pick me. But, I don't care. Because helping your kid is more important than anything else, right? Giving them the support that they need, tailored support, is more important than anything else. There's always the temptation, people go to workshops because they want a magic wand. They want someone to give them a 1, 2, 3 formula. But with the neurobehavioral model, we don't do that. We are facilitators, not trainers, because we help you as the parent figure it out, because you know your child better than anyone ever will.
And that's a really good distinction too.
Yeah, no matter how much, if you talk to me for 5 hours and then ask your question, I'm still only going to be guessing. Because you hold those cards, not me.
Yeah.
Right? I can help you put a good hand together with the cards that you're holding, but you've got the deck, right? And remembering too that this is an invisible physical disability with behavioral symptoms. Putting accommodations into place to support your child is just as effective, just as ethical, just as appropriate as it is to provide accommodations to someone whose disabilities happen to be visible. Right? And I know what it's like to get pushback against invisible disabilities, right? I have a service dog for my diabetes. I had never considered diabetes to be a disability until 10 years ago, when at 7 o'clock in the morning when I woke up, I tested my sugar. It was 30.
Wow.
If you're listening from Europe, that's 1.6. And if you understand those numbers, you know it's not life sustainable, right? And even though the fridge was only 15 steps away, because we don't camp, we glamp, right? We're in an RV. I knew I couldn't afford the calories of going 15 steps, right? So I woke my husband up, get me some juice. And while he was doing that, I realized my sugar has tanked more in the last 6 months than in the previous 4 decades.
Wow.
And that scared the snot out of me. That was scarier than the medical crisis that was playing out. Because I realized not only is my pancreas broken, thank you very much, but so is my brain. It's not recognizing the symptoms of a critical malfunction. And it's not telling my body to generate those symptoms that would clue me into the problem.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't shaking. I wasn't having a cold sweat. Nothing. I felt fine. It was not life sustainable.
Does your dog alert on low sugar?
She does, low and high.
Okay. That's
and
good.
So, so I remembered that day reading an article on diabetic alert dogs, right? And thinking, wow, I wonder if that's a possibility. It took me a while to do the research and present it to my husband, because they come with big price tags.
Yes. Yeah, they are
$20,000, and they're actually a lot more than that now. But yeah. I don't have that kind of discretionary money. I didn't know. Right. I don't know anyone that has that laying around. So that means fundraising. Who, me? I don't like public speaking. Can you tell? But 10 years ago, I didn't.
Yeah.
I really didn't. So, but it was a choice that I had to make, because something had to change, right? That's when I came to terms with the fact I had an invisible disability, right? Because I needed more tools than I had. Even though I had the best technology insurance could buy, it wasn't enough. I needed something else.
Yeah.
And I couldn't keep my very life going without it, right? So that's the definition of a disability. And then 6 months later, when she was half paid off and they allowed her to come home, I immediately got the pushback that people do with invisible disabilities, right? At least twice a week, someone would say, "Are you training her to give to a family?" No, she works for me. In fact, yeah. I even got a patch for her vest that says she works for her.
Yeah.
The arrow that points to me. I'm very tempted to ask people equally rude things. Oh, can I play with the knobs on your oxygen tank? Pet my dog. It's amazing.
There's one lady on TikTok who has a service dog, and she got tired of people, asking to come up and stuff. And so she got she still had the service dog, everything on it. But then underneath it, she had a little Velcro patch that says F off. And it's in big, big letters. And she said that works better than any service dog, anything, where it just says fuck off right on the dog. Like, that's it. That lets people know immediately, no.
So my girl is retired. I've not taken her out since COVID hit. But if, and I don't need her anymore because technology is so much better, right?
Yeah.
But depending on if there's any funding for Medicare by the time I need it, I may end up with another service dog, right? Because you never know with insurance in our country, what's going to still be accessible.
Yeah.
So if I partner with a dog again, I will be getting an FU patch.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, MommaFoxFire.
It just turns people off so much faster. Like, it makes it more clear. No. Yeah. You can't even get it. Just if you wanted to be more nice about it, I guess you could get in big letters that just says not friendly. But people will ignore that too. They're less likely to ignore it if it's a little vulgar.
Kids are so much better than adults when it comes to the patches, right? Because adults look at them and think that they refer to everybody else, but not them. They're special.
Yep. Yeah, I was telling you, I had that conversation with my 9-year-old the other day at a restaurant when a service dog passed our table. I was like, nope, that dog's working. You don't get to even ask if you can pet it. It's working. That's what it's here for.
Right.
And he didn't ask any more questions. He was just like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Nope.
Good for
no
him.
problem.
Yeah. Oh, my. So fast forward 10 years, and I was training with FASCETS, right? And going through the exploration tool and learning about all the primary characteristics. And I'm thinking, oh, I see me in so many places. And we had to, with many learning situations, after you do an exercise, they tell you to go do it with other people, right? So this was a draw your brain. And my mom was who happened to be home for me to have her draw her brain. And she's always been very intelligent. So forgetting that she had dementia, I started geeking out on this stuff, right? What was I thinking? But my husband comes through the room very flippantly, says, oh, is that what's wrong with you? Mama, did you drink while you were carrying me? Oh, yeah, every day.
Oh, no.
Because that's what women did in the 50s and the 60s.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So that's another reason why I choose FASD over dementia for this last phase of my career.
Yeah.
Right? Boy, nothing like waiting till you're at the sunset of your career before you get hit with passion.
Yep. Well, if you guys want to find out more about Patricia, again, here are the socials one more time. Website has all of her coaching and information on there if you want to connect there. Feel free to reach out. And then LinkedIn, Facebook, all of that stuff is right there. Patti, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a really good and very enlightening conversation. So I really appreciate you
very welcome.
taking the time out today.
You are very welcome. It was my pleasure. And I had a really good time.
Yeah. And Bitemark says, thank you so much for being here. I learned a lot and have more reading to do. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining me on this enlightening journey through the world of FASCETS Neurobehavioral Model and its profound implications for FASD within the realm of child welfare. If this episode resonated with you, or if you learned something new, even something small, please share it with a friend, a family member, someone you work with. Knowledge is a powerful tool, and by spreading awareness about FASD, we can really make a difference in the lives of those affected. The more people who hear this message, the better, and also that helps support the podcast. So don't forget to subscribe to Even Tacos Fall Apart to stay updated on our latest episodes. And if you have a moment, leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform would really mean the world to me. Your feedback helps me grow and helps me reach more people, which keeps me going here. We've uncovered valuable insights, challenged misconceptions, and hopefully broadened our perspective on this critical issue. Remember, knowledge is the first step towards change, and the more we understand, the better equipped we are to make a positive impact. Special thanks to our incredible guest tonight, Patti Kasper, for sharing her expertise and experiences with me today. For those of you eager to learn more, I have included links to additional resources and information related to today's topic on my website, tacosfallapart.com. Feel free to explore and expand your knowledge further through any of those links. And I just want to extend also a heartfelt thank you to each and every one of you for listening and joining me on this journey. Your support and encouragement, I already said this, but it's true, really means the world to me. And I can't wait to have you back for more enriching conversations. Until next time, remember that knowledge has the power to transform lives. So keep questioning, keep learning, and keep making a difference in your world and the world of others.